My name is Molly. I know lots of you, but there are some faces that I've never seen before. So hello to everybody that I haven't met yet. And I am a part of the comms team for AIMS2 trials, and I'm really excited to share everything that I've been learning about how to craft a community engagement plan. Before we get started, I just want to go over our schedule today and then set just some group boundaries and expectations so we all know what we're getting ourselves into. So we're going to start with just a small chat from me that's going to give some context to the workshop that we're going to do afterwards. And then we'll break into 2 rooms and we'll do a, we'll give you guys 10 minutes to kind of look through a worksheet that I've put together that hopefully will kind of get you inspired and get you thinking about some of the things that you need to do to get a community engagement plan in place. So you can feel free to just kind of jot down notes during that 10 minutes after I speak. And then we'll come into our breakout rooms and we'll really get into the nitty-gritty of those worksheets, talk through them and talk through all the considerations that we have previously discussed. And then if we have time, which is very optimistic, I can go over our toolkit and kind of what has been added to that. And there's a bunch of resources that I will send out afterwards. But if we have extra time, we can just go over it. So just some group guidelines. The first thing is to take control of your own noise, especially during this presentation. If you guys could remain on mute unless you're speaking, that would be lovely. When we are in the breakout rooms, feel free to stay unmuted because it's a bit of a conversational kind of environment. We definitely want you guys to have your say, so feel free to switch your cameras on or off as you need. Feel free to use the chat or the raise hand function if you would like to speak. We want you to be present and we want you to be comfortable. This is going to be an hour-long workshop, so if you need to have a bio break or a comfort break of any kind, grab water, anything you need to do, just go for it. And the last thing is to show respect. So we want you to challenge the idea, not the person. We may be talking about some things that are a bit uncomfortable for some people, and many of us are new to this kind of work. So if we could all just be very patient with each other and try to remember that we're here to learn from each other and to grow. Amazing. I will be keeping time for a meeting today, so no need to worry about that. And our facilitators and our breakout rooms will also be keeping time, and we'll be moving those along to make sure that everyone gets a chance to speak and that we cover all the points that we need to cover. So I'm going to give a very brief introduction to how I think about crafting community engagement plans. A little bit of background about me. I am an autism researcher, and I also specialize in community engagement, both here at Cambridge and at UCL. At UCL, I run a master's program for master's students that want to partner with the voluntary sector to craft their dissertation. So I teach them how to do that and research all at the same time. And then here I work with the community engagement team to help support you guys to work better with our AREPs in AIMS2 trials, and also with generally the people that we engage with the ARC as well. So when thinking about kind of community engagement, participatory research, or coming up with a plan for the research that you're going to be conducting can be quite overwhelming. So I've tried to break that process down with the help of the National Coordinating Center for Public Engagement, which is a great website if you haven't looked at it. And really, you can break it down into 3 areas. So you have to identify your purpose, you have to identify the people that you're going to be working with, and the process of how you're going to do that. And then once you have that information, you evaluate all of it to make sure that it's feasible, and you have your plan. So that's not the end of the talk. I'm going to break down all of these things, and we're going to go into some key considerations and just some things to get you thinking about how you can actually make a really feasible plan that you can carry out in your work. So the first is breaking down your purpose. So you have to think about why we're engaging people in our work. And these can be really kind of meta things, but also very, very specific reasons. Many people engage the community in their work to share what they're doing. If you think about kind of dissemination, sharing your findings, things like that. People engage people in the beginning of their work because they want to co-create knowledge, they want to learn from the community, and they want to apply that knowledge together. It can also be a great way to build trust amongst the community or to respond to the needs and requests of the community. And finally, it's a great way to change attitudes or beliefs. When you involve the community in your work, you can change their attitudes, but you can also change your own attitudes as a researcher. And you can really grow in your understanding of your research and in your practice. But there's some really important things that we need to keep in mind when thinking about this purpose. You need to be clear about what your purpose is so that you can communicate it to others. This really helps build trust with the people that you're engaging. If you're bringing them together for some unknown reason, you're not going to get really good engagement, and you're not going to build a strong relationship with them. This also kind of combats the reason that many people think about engagement, which is just engaging people just because my grant said I had to, just because, you know, that's part of what we do here at said institution. The answer should never be just because. Community engagement is engaging process, and it takes work and thought, and there's also a lot of responsibility when you're engaging with the community. You're building a relationship, and you're representing not just yourself as a researcher, but also your institution and your field sometimes as well. So being really thoughtful in why you're going out to engage, both personally as a researcher and, you know, for your project and for your field, that can set you up to be really successful in what you're asking of people. And it makes a lot of the kind of planning of the process down the line a lot easier. Does anyone have any questions on kind of identifying your purpose before I move on? Great. I'm going to open the chat too. I just realized I can't see it. Eliza, breakout rooms for 20 minutes, by the way. I just saw your question. Great. So now let's talk about the people, because typically we will be engaging people in our research. This one is pretty straightforward. I think it's something that a lot of people forget when they're doing their research, but you need to think about who you need to speak to achieve the purpose that you've identified, but also who your research is involved with. And we want to be as specific as possible here. And I want to just take a step back and think about, you know, as we go through our worksheet, that's the planning stage. And the goal of the planning stage in the first run is to be as idealistic as possible. So if you had no constraints, if you could access every person that you wanted to access, if you had great relationships with them, who would you need to speak to? And the example that I have here is, who gives you better access to the experience of being autistic and being at a secondary school? Is it a non-autistic parent or an autistic 18-year-old at a secondary school? And the answer would be an autistic 18-year-old at a secondary school, because they're speaking to their experience. You might not be able to speak to them for various reasons. I know a lot of my master's students have a hard time accessing younger people because of DBS checks. Some people have limited time and you won't be able to do your due diligence. But all of those things we're not thinking about yet. We're just writing down the gold standard of who we want to talk to. And it may be not as specific. You know, if you're researching something more general, it might just be experiences of people generally, but most of us have a specific population that we're working with. I think most of us here are primarily autism researchers or autistic people. And that, I think, at a baseline, we want to try and speak to autistic people as much as possible. That may not always be possible, but we can talk about that as we get down the line. This is when we start to think about some really, really key things, especially as autism researchers. The first question that we want to start thinking about as we're listing these people is, who has the power in these conversations? You don't have to write this down at this point, but you might think, you know, if you're going to, you as a researcher are going to be interviewing autistic people with complex mental health needs, there's a lot of weight in that conversation. There's a lot of kind of differential in power. Maybe there's some mistrust that might be happening. And it's just important to keep that in mind as you're listing out these different groups that you might intend to work with. You also might want to think about why they would want to engage with you. So you have your purpose for why you want to engage with them, but why would they want to engage with you? What does your research offer them? What can you offer them, you know, in terms of compensation, other reasons, other benefits for engaging, but also what does your research offer them? And a lot of people will expect you to kind of articulate that to them. And it also helps you drive up your engagement and build those strong relationships, because that's what this is really. It's relationship building. And I think that when you're able to go back to your purpose that we identified initially, a lot of those purposes that were written down are about working together with people. So as long as you keep that in mind, it's a really great way to start to build that relationship. The next thing is starting to just keep an eye on the different things that people need to engage successfully. Are there accommodations that people might need in order to participate in focus groups? Or is there a knowledge gap? Perhaps you study something really complex, some really complex genetic thing. I'm not a genetics researcher. That may be difficult to explain to people. Will that take more time? How difficult will it be? Is that feasible? Those are all of the questions that you're going to be asking yourself down the line. And these are the things that should be kind of floating around in your head at this point. And the last thing I like to do is just think, is there anyone missing from the conversation? So, you know, if we're thinking about just autistic people generally, the experiences of autistic people, what types of autistic people may be missing? Are we representing autistic people with learning disabilities? Are we representing autistic people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds? Who are typically not represented in those conversations? And would it be possible or appropriate to include them in your community engagement? Does anyone have any questions on that? I know that I talk a bit fast sometimes, apologies. Beautiful. All right, take a breath. That's for me, mostly. So you have the purpose of why you're going to engage people. You have the people, the list, the idealistic list of all the people that you would want to engage in your work. And now you have to start thinking about the process of how you're going to engage them in your research. So thinking about where meaningful community engagement can be achieved is really important. And I think all of us in some way are familiar with the flow of a research study. There are different stages and different processes that go along with those different stages of the research process. So first we have the development. That's when you're really designing the study. You're going through things like budgeting, the ethics process, figuring out data ownership, applying for grants even. It can start as early as that. This is the developmental stage, and there's tons of areas for people to come in and to consult on the process or be a part of that design and development of the research. The next is the implementation. So this is actually carrying out the research, things like hiring your research assistants, training your staff to start working with participants or collecting data, doing your recruitment, data collection, all the way to analyzing that data and kind of getting it together, getting it ready for publication or whatever the next step is for that data. So that's the kind of nitty-gritty bit of being a researcher. And this is where a lot of community engagement drops off. People think that community partners and people with lived experience can't be a part of data analysis, can't be a part of training of staff or recruitment. And there are really creative ways that, if you look in some great papers that are coming out now, especially in the field of autism research, you can partner with the community on your data collection. Even you can partner with the community on your data analysis. Obviously we have things like ethics and you know, privacy and also just the whole red tape of the university and how it works sometimes. But I think that there's a lot of work coming out in the past couple of years that has some creative ways of doing that. And a lot of those studies are included in our toolkit that I'll be sending out. So I'll earmark some of them. And it's great to copy their methodology and see how it can apply for you. The next is dissemination. I think we're all very familiar with this. It's writing up those papers, getting that information out there, not just to the scientific world, but also to the community. So if you're doing any kind of lay writing, if you're contributing to lay science communication, if you're talking to our team to have an article on our website or doing one of our community-facing webinars, All of that is in the dissemination stage. And there are really great ways to partner with people to co-write your findings, to make sure that your lay abstract is actually accessible, to make sure that your paper is including language that is respectful and inclusive and reflects the values of the communities that you're working with. And this is a great way to really foster a strong sense of trust, because your work and the work that these people have been doing with you is now going out into the world. And it's not only a reflection of you at this point, it's also a reflection of those community partners who have worked on it with you. So it's really important to continue to partner through this stage. There's also evaluation that you can do. Some people build evaluation of their process as a researcher into the dissemination stage. So you may have a sort of wrap-up meeting with your lab to talk about how the overall grant project went. You may be reflecting on those kind of next stages. And that's where sustainability comes in. So I think a lot of researchers don't think about this last step of sustainability. So we do some of the things of it, but we don't make it a part of our concrete process. So these are things like thinking about where your data is going to be stored long-term, thinking about where your data is going to be shared, if people are requesting for that data to be shared after you've published. This may not be laid out at the beginning of the project for some people. Also thinking about if you have findings, translating them into the actual action in the community, or building partnerships with other fields to continue that work. One of the examples that I was saying is if you find out in your work that a new drug needs to be developed to address something, but you're not a pharmacologist and that's not your field, we as researchers can push forward to suggest that that needs to be researched. We can make strategic partnerships to be able to develop that. And that should be a consultative process with the people who worked on the project with you, with your community stakeholders who are partnering with you. They can really drive that and give some interesting insights. Also policy development for where that's relevant, and just the general future directions of where you're going with your research. Again, I want you to think of the relationships that you're going to be building. You're not just planning, a one-off community engagement for one project. These are relationships that can continue on, and you can have consistent collaborators throughout your career that can really help you drive where you seek funding in the future and what projects you continue to work on. This is a slightly blurry picture, sorry. All of that, it can be a bit overwhelming because the research process is a very long and arduous one, but it doesn't have to look like 100% maximum engagement at every point in the research process the entire time. That's not appropriate, and it's not realistic. We as researchers bring a certain amount of expertise and a certain skill set, just as our community collaborators bring a certain amount of expertise and skill set. And learning where to place that skill set and that expertise is the most important part of designing your community engagement plan. So I think this diagram does a really, really great job of showing different choice points in the research process and how engagement may be more or less at different choice points. So you might have a 100% kind of egalitarian approach to the design of your study, but because your study includes, data collection methods that are not appropriate for someone in the community to be participating in, then that may just be more about informing them about what's happening or consulting them on that process and having them in those meetings while you're troubleshooting or data collection or recruitment or things like that. It's a circular process because we as researchers are always moving on to the next project. And I think that kind of sustainability piece, which here they've labeled as, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but they've labeled it as ACT. That's what I consider to be the sustainability piece. It flows into the next project and it flows into the next partnership, and it's building a relationship, not just with one community member, but with the community as a whole. Before I move on, does anyone have questions about those two different points? Nice. I hope I'm being so very clear. Great. So one thing that I think this diagram doesn't cover is that sometimes community engagement can be achieved in the sort of in-between stages. So if you're thinking about those concrete steps, how am I going to engage people? And it takes a lot of creativity to list out those concrete steps. Some of them might not fit very neatly into the implementation stage or the development stage. They might be a little bit in between. And that's okay. I don't think we have to be rigid about exactly when in this month am I going to start to, talk to people about this. It's a bit more of a fluid process because you're working with people. And a lot of what you're doing is you're gathering perspective and you're shifting and pivoting as you get more perspective on your work. So some things might be very, very, very concrete because they might have a deadline. For example, in the development, you can co-design the research proposal together. That has to be done at a finite date and it has to be done before the project starts. So that's definitely would be considered in the development stage. But something else like helping to decide on recommendations for the community based on the results, that could be partially in your dissemination. It could be partially in the sustainability stage, because part of it could be that you're putting together a sort of piece of scientific writing for lay communication that has concrete recommendations based on the research that you put together. But also you at the same time could be putting together, you could use those points and that piece of work to inform a grant application that you're putting together for future research on how to implement those things actually in the community. I think it's a lot more fluid than people would like. And as long as you have a bit of that flexibility and you can communicate that flexibility to the people that you're working with, it's great. The key thing that I want to point out about this little kind of layout that I've written is that engagement is happening at every step of the research process, regardless of whether it's a little bit in the middle, regardless of whether it's in just one thing, it is happening throughout. And if we go back to this diagram, we can see that at the very least, we have information provided to those stakeholders. When you partner with a group of people that from the community that want to participate in your work and want to give you, insight, it's best practice to continue to inform them about what's happening with your work. And you might not be able to, based on your experience, based on the constraints of the project, timing, budget, things like that, you may be able to only consult them at the very beginning through a focus group, through designing the grant proposal together, things like that. But informing them throughout maintains the relationship and also allows them to be educated on the process because they've put in their time and their work. And that needs to be respected. So this is the part where it gets really, it takes a lot of creativity and to come up with the actual concrete ways that you will engage people. And I always say, if you're having trouble coming up with creative ways to engage people in your work in the different process, in the different stages, looking to research is always the best option. Following really great researchers who do community engagement on Twitter or on whatever social network will replace Twitter is always a good option. They tend to talk about and post their engagement on their pages. Reading articles that may be outside of your field can give you some inspiration and help you innovate to bring those practices and methodologies into your field. I get inspiration all the time from like architecture research, because architects really like to design things that are informed by the people who are going to use them. And they have some really innovative ways of gathering perspectives and bringing people into the process throughout. So definitely try to be creative with this. And it is just, we are in the brainstorming portion of it again. So we want to be idealistic. We want to be creative. Just because you don't use an idea during a project that you're working on right now doesn't mean you can't use it in the future. It's something to get excited about. But as we're doing this and we're getting all the creative juices flowing, it is important to start to keep in mind a few things as we approach this sort of evaluation. So the first thing is going back to that purpose, thinking about why you want to engage people. does your process reflect and fulfill the purpose that you've set out at the beginning? Or do you need to tweak your purpose and then tweak your process and kind of go through the thing again? You also have to keep asking yourself who has the power. You want to make sure that your engagement is really meaningful. And I have some very concrete steps, a few slides down, that we're going to discuss to make sure that your engagement is meaningful. And the last thing is being realistic, sticking to plans that build community trust. That's what the evaluation stage we're about to go in is all about. You want to be very creative, you want to be reflective, and you want to be engaged in this process. So I'm going to kind of speed through the evaluation because we're running short on time. Really, evaluation is all about thinking, what are the resources and what are the constraints you have? So you want to think about the funding opportunities that you might have, the funding that you currently have procured or are going to procure. You want to think about the resources that you have at your research center or the institution that you're at, any current relationships that you have with the community, the skill set within yourself as a researcher and within your team, and also any past work that you can lean on, like I said, those publications, things like that. So it's really helpful once you have that plan to look through and list any resources and constraints that you have. Funding is a lot of the time the biggest thing. If you have a limited budget, you don't have an ability to apply for more, you can't compensate people. That is a major constraint on your research. Also, I think, just to kind of speed through this, relationships with the community, particularly the autistic community, can be both a resource and a constraint. In the instance of AIMS2 trials, we have our lovely AREPs that we can use as our community collaborators and who can also give a lot of insight into the perspective of the community and how to build that relationship. You may have coworkers that have lived experience as well that you can lean on, but also it's important to recognize that there are tensions with the community and there's a tumultuous social media relationship with the community, and those things can be constraints on how you engage with the community and how much trust you need to build before you can get to really meaningful engagement. So the goal of listing out those constraints is to scale down what you've actually decided to do into something that is feasible and achievable and is appropriate for the scale of your project. And eventually you'll be able to list out all of the different things that you will concretely do and commit to do. When you have that final list, after you've scaled everything down with your constraints, you need to reflect on a few things. Your research must be respectful, it must be manageable, and it must be productive. Being respectful means that you reimburse your collaborators. It means you communicate in a way that is sensitive to everyone's needs. You anticipate any barriers to participation, and you prioritize support to overcome those barriers, and you recognize the expertise that collaborators bring. Being manageable means that you ensure you have power and resources to carry out any engagement activities that you plan. That's a really key one. If you're not in a position to actually carry out the work, then you can't promise that you're going to carry out the work. You need to ensure that your collaborators understand the project. Like I was saying, if your project is really complex scientifically, they're not able to understand what you're researching because you aren't able to communicate it to them. That's not going to be a very effective style of collaboration. And you also need sufficient time and, again, funding. The reason that you need all those things is because you need it to be productive. You want the collaborators to be involved in the decision making. You want the input not at one single phase, but through the entirety of the project. And you want to be able to say to the people that you're involving, this is what I'm intending to do. This is my purpose. Here are the areas that you're going to be involved. And these are the things that we can't do. Making sure that the expectations are very clear helps to build trust and also helps your process to be more successful because you're not going to get bogged down in people trying to change things that they can't change about the project. So it's going to take a lot of time to master this. It's a new methodology. It takes a lot of practice. What I was saying earlier to some of my colleagues is that it's frustrating because you have to mess up a lot for you to grow in this process. And sometimes messing up can be really uncomfortable. and people can get upset. But that's what engaging with the community is. It's building a relationship with a large group of people, and it takes a lot of time. So that is my presentation.